vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sprinkler sun, alright. Well,
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we go over this past weekend of racing. Joining me today is Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing, Seth Eggert from Motorsports Tribune, and Richard Youden from Eau Rouge Engineering. Gentlemen, how is everybody tonight?
Terrific.
Doing good.
All right, so before we get into the racing news, just a little bit of a sad note. Earlier this week, Miss Mary Holman George, Chairman Emeritus of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, passed away at the age of 83. She's been a familiar sight at the Speedway ever since she's a small child. She's the only child of Tony Holman, who bought the Speedway back post World War II, brought it back to life. She was always there. She gave the command to start engines from 1997 through 2015. She did the command there with her whole family in 2016 before turning that over to her son, Tony George. And she was also a philanthropist and very involved in the community. So, a very familiar sight at the Speedway. We're sad that she's gone. Our thoughts and prayers go out to all of her friends and family members and those that knew her. So, again, sad news, Mary Holman George passed away. Meanwhile, NASCAR was in Texas. Kevin, we all kind of wrote our articles and finished up everything Monday with Kevin Harvick guaranteed his spot in the chase, coming down as probably the championship favorites going into Miami. Meanwhile, come Wednesday morning, the penalties are announced, and Harvick is basically he's not stripped of the win because NASCAR doesn't strip wins, but the win is ruled encumbered. It doesn't count towards the championship. Therefore, he goes from having a guaranteed spot in Miami to being just above the cut line. So realistically, he's fighting for his life at this point because you've got Harvick plus 8 pretty other good cars going after 3 available spots. And if one of these guys below the cut line, say Kurt Busch, Eric Almirola, Clint Boyer, were to win this race, and Harvick finishes anywhere behind Kyle Busch and Truex, it's going to put Harvick out of the game. So now, Gray, you and I had discussed this earlier in the season about the encumbered wins and could this happen during the playoffs and what would be the reaction? So now we have it. So what are your thoughts, Gray?
Yeah, I mean it's put Harvick in quite a precarious position. He's only 3 points above the cutoff. He lost a total of 4. He was docked a total of 40 points, and probably more important than that, or more significant than that. If that wasn't bad enough, he loses his crew chief and car chief for the remainder of the season. They are suspended for the next 2 races, the final 2 races of the season. So that's really going to put that 4 team behind the 8 ball. I'll tell you this, that team's got a lot of depth. They've got Kevin Harvick driving the car. They've been good all year long. As big a deficit as it appears on the face, I think that team's still going to go to Phoenix with a good shot to win. They've done it before. I believe they won there in the spring. I believe that with the depth that team's got, they can still overcome what's been put out before them. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, startling news really when you think about it. And not only did they get Harvick, they got Blaney and Eric Jones, but those pale in comparison to Harvick's sanctions, because those two cars are no longer in the chase and really doesn't affect the championship. So yeah, we'll just see how it goes. I mean, they've got a hole that they're in, but they're still right now. They're still got their heads above water, and they know what they've got to do going into to Phoenix. We'll just see if they can pull one out.
Yeah. Now let's talk about this specific infraction a little bit, for those that maybe understand. And maybe, Richard, you can jump in on this as well. But it's my understanding that they had modified the spoiler or the mounting of the spoiler, and it was something it's something that wasn't an accident, correct?
Yes, it was not an accident.
It's a piece that's supposed to be supplied by the manufacturer.
There's a waterfall on what they call a waterfall on the back of the deck lid, and it's back there. It's a piece. It's a composite piece, and then there's the spoiler itself. The spoilers are come from Richardson. They're CNC cut, and theirs apparently was altered. The shape was altered in some way. I can tell you that all teams play with that. It's an area that the teams play in, some more so than others. And I am sure that Richardson is working overtime tonight to fix spoilers that teams can have at the ready to be shipped to Phoenix for this weekend's race.
It's interesting because at the super speedway races, the cars turn up without a spoiler, and NASCAR hands them out, on Friday morning or whenever it is. That's my understanding of how that typically works. But right. I think there's two things I wanted to sort of briefly mention. Was firstly, there's been some pretty not harsh penalties. That's the wrong word this week. But post race, and my understanding is NASCAR take 3 cars at. So let's just rewind a minute. Sorry. My understanding was NASCAR takes 3 cars post-race. They take the first place, the second place, and then a random to the tech center down there in North Carolina. So obviously they took Harvick's car, and I can't remember the results now. Was
Blaney
Jones,
was second.
Okay, Blaney was second, and then so fair enough. So all 3 cars that got taken post-race had an issue with them. Now, is this? It's not unusual because I've been in meetings where crew chiefs have come back from a race where the car's been taken, and there's a few things that it's like, hey, don't do this again, and be careful with that. That needs to be tighter or whatever it may be. But do you think really, maybe this is just the time when NASCAR clamped down on them and said, bang, we're drawing the line here. This is getting out of hand. We're going to make an example of you guys.
Well, and I'm sure it's been discussed in prior weeks. There's probably been some borderline stuff going on. NASCAR has seen it, and this week they decided that someone stepped over the line. Now I don't know that. I'm not sure. They said body modification on the 20 and the 12. I don't know what that was. I don't know the exact infraction there.
For the 20, it was the package tray.
Yep.
Okay.
And for the 12, it was the front crush panel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and they've been playing with that right front crush panel for a while now. They've done some really kind of wacky stuff with that. That's been going on for some time, but and then two, one other thing that was done prior to the race, when the cars were sitting on the line, an infraction of improper body modification infraction was discovered on the 10 car prior to the start of the race, and he had to move to the back of the field. Seth, did you hear what that specific infraction was?
It went through tech, it passed tech, and my understanding is it was something similar to what may or may not have happened with the 12, that they played with the crush panel, and NASCAR noticed it and didn't like it. Something else I do want to mention, since we're on the subject of penalties and going to the back of the field, Jimmy Johnson, it wasn't until about 20, 30 laps into the race. Now, Jimmy Johnson had failed tech prior to the race twice. That does not mean you go and lose your starting position. If you fail tech twice, I believe it's just the car chief. 3 times it's to the tail end. 4 times it's points. Well, he failed twice, lost the car chief, but they made the team go and start at the rear of the field after sending out a notice 20 minutes prior to the race that they had only failed twice. Somewhere NASCAR dropped the ball on their communication, and they admitted it about 30 to 40 laps into the race when they finally caught the fact that they made a mistake.
Yeah, and there's no going back there, right? You're not going to say, "Oh, everybody let Jimmy go ahead." 30 laps into the race. Yeah, that's a mess. But I mean, did the team not protest there? Did they not say, "Why are we going to the back?" Or
well, my understanding is Chad Knaus knew, and for some reason, either the team never protested or they misunderstood the rule and thought that because they failed tech twice, they had to go to the back.
I can understand somebody misunderstanding the rule because they seem to change a lot. So I'm just throwing that out there, not being mean.
Yeah, I've got a very quick point as well on the whole Kevin Harvick situation. Was it necessary? Really, I mean, that 4 car has been probably the dominant car of the season. Did they really need to push at this stage of the season and take that risk? I mean, they must have known that they were, on the borderline with what they were trying to do. And if they'd been warned about it in previous weeks, which is Gray said, is not unusual for them to sort of, put out those notices. Did they really need to do that? I mean, as long as they had 2 solid finishes at Texas and Phoenix, they were pretty much guaranteed to make it to Homestead, weren't they?
Well, he had more bonus points than anybody, so he had those he had points in the bank. So I mean, essentially, basically, all he's got to do is really run in the top 5. Yeah,
exactly. And which they would have done without any hesitation.
Exactly, but you don't know to what extreme they had been doing. And Richard, as you well know, it's a cat and mouse game in the garage.
Oh, sure.
It always is. It always has been. You get by with things for a couple of weeks, and okay, well we'll take a little more. They don't notice it. We're getting it by, and all of a sudden, bang! You get it. And I tell you, the thing about it is, other people in the garage notice it. The word gets out. Other people are doing the same things. There's a lot of smart people in that garage area doing similar things. Not a lot of secrets in that garage. And, some guys push the envelope more than others. And and all of a sudden, bang, NASCAR gets tired of the shenanigans and they decide to put a stop to it. NASCAR could probably be a little more consistent in their enforcement. If they would enforce what's already in black and white in the rule book from week to week consistently, sometimes they would not have the issues they have. Like I said, we'll just have to see. But as of right now, that's the big news. Going to create a stir when the cars show up at Phoenix, I'm sure. Be a lot of questions asked. And, of course, the 4 car knows what they've got to do.
It's not exactly as if Harvick's a slouch around Phoenix, is it really?
No, and like I said, with the depth that team has got, it's a bit of a handicap, but this team's won 8 races this year and has been probably the preeminent front runner all year long. I would think that they'll pull their resources together. They'll pull together, and I would be shocked unless Unless he, the only way I see it is if Harvick goes out there and he has that team has a misstep as a speeding penalty or some problem on pit road.
Yeah, or if he gets caught up in somebody else's wreck.
An errant
you know what I
time.
mean?
Well, I
That's
tell you
doable
what,
around Phoenix as well, isn't it?
It is, but I think Harvick will run close enough to the front unless he does have one of those snafus I just mentioned, that he should be able to avoid any of that stuff.
Is this? Sorry, very quickly. Is this the first time that the new layout and pit area will be used at Phoenix this week?
Yeah, the new configuration where the start-finish line has been moved around to actually the between the first and second turns.
They also renamed the turn, so where essentially it's the only track now on the circuit that the pit road is almost exclusively on the backstretch. Just two notes, speaking of depth in the organization, Tony Gibson will be the crew chief for Kevin Harvick in the final two races this season. They are not appealing the penalty. And there was one other penalty in the truck series, the Next Gen Motorsports number 35. It's only their second start of the season. They're going to run the next two races with plans to run full-time next year. They lost ballast from the truck during practice. The crew chief, truck chief, and the mechanic have all been suspended for the next 3 truck races. Now, there's only 2 left this season.
So obviously it carries over to the
It carries over, so they will also not be able to be at Daytona next year.
Oh. NASCAR frowns at losing ballast. The situation that can cause very dangerous situation if that stuff gets loose and gets out onto the track. You're talking about a 2x4 piece of tungsten is 6 inches long that is pretty substantial and cause quite a bit of damage if it gets hit on the racetrack. So yeah, NASCAR does frown on that, and that's a good rule, and that will make sure that they secure that tungsten ballast next time they put that car together. So yeah, that's a good rule there. Going back to the race itself, we've covered Kevin Harvick's penalty, but yeah, Harvick had a dominant car out there. Ryan Blaney sat on the pole, led a good number of laps, but as soon as they got the race going, Harvick quickly went to the front and won the first and second stage. I believe I'm correct there, and then late race restart, he had to overcome that. He blew past Blaney on the green-white checker and never looked back and won the race. It was kind of a typical Texas race since they reconfigured the track. Some would say a little bit boring. Not a great deal of action in the Cup race. They've made that track pretty difficult since they can reconfigure the first turn. They made it one of those progressive banking type tracks in turns 1 and 2. They widened the track from 58 feet to 78 feet and reduced the banking from 24 to 20 degrees. And then, of course, left turns 3 and 4 the same. So it's a difficult track to get hold of. You have to kind of compromise from one end to the other. Sometimes it leads to a little bit of single file racing. Passing was very difficult in this particular race. I'm hoping that the new aero configuration that they're going to go to next year will help racing at Texas. We'll see what happens. Wasn't a great deal of lead changes that went on, particularly under green flag conditions. So there's the wrap up on the race. Kevin Harvick gets the win, and then we find out Wednesday it's not quite what we think it is. So we'll move on to Phoenix and see where we go. But there's a couple other races there, and Seth can tell us about those.
The Indy Truck Series, it was Todd Gilliland's race to lose. He dominated, led about half the race, ran out of gas with a half lap to go. Justin Haley, who was in the playoffs, snatched the victory. He's going on to Homestead along with his teammate Johnny Sauter. So GMS Racing has half the playoff spots in the Truck Series. Ben Rhodes finished second. Brett Moffitt, another playoff driver, in third. Gilliland ultimately ended up fourth. And Austin Hill in the Young's Motorsports truck, an underfunded team, finished fifth. And in the Truck Series, there were not a lot of wrecks. There were not a lot of cautions. So that was actually impressive that the 0-2, which, again, that was also in one of the various cautions. Granted, there were only 4 or 5. But he was in one of the accidents, came back to finish fifth at Texas up against the Kyle Busch Motorsports trucks, the GMS trucks, the ThorSport trucks, in one of these small underfunded teams.
So we going forward, we've got 2 of the final 4 already set, correct?
Yes.
All right. And they are against
Justin Haley and Johnny Sauter.
Okay. Who are the other ones still in contention for the other 2 spots?
You have Brett Moffitt and Noah Gregson. Gregson is currently the cutoff. You also have Grant Enfinger, who is about 10 points back, and Matt Crafton, who is about 20 points back. Moffitt only has a cushion of 7 points.
Okay, so they'll race at Phoenix this weekend, and of course they'll settle everything at Homestead on championship weekend. Give us a recap on what will turn out to be a kind of a wild Xfinity race.
Let's see. There were 13 cautions for 54 laps of the 200-lap race. Cole Custer ultimately won with a last lap pass. All 3 races this weekend had a last lap pass for the victory. But Cole Custer snatched the lead on the final lap from Tyler Reddick, going on to score his second career victory, locking himself into Homestead. He is the only Xfinity driver locked into the championship for the Xfinity Series. Tyler Reddick ended up second. Austin Cindric, another playoff driver, was third. You had Hunter Nemechek finish fourth, and Justin Allgaier, who was one of the favorites, ended up fifth. For the playoffs in the Xfinity Series, Elliott Sadler is second, with Daniel Hemrick third, and Justin Allgaier, although he's fourth, he is not currently in the playoffs because Cole Custer is sixth. Custer is the only one locked in. So currently, Justin Allgaier, one of the favorites, is 12 points out. Christopher Bell had another atrocious weekend, got caught up in 2 different accidents, didn't finish the race. He is 38 points behind the cutoff.
So he's in a must-win situation going to Phoenix.
Correct.
To transfer. And correct me if I'm wrong, that's 2 weeks in a row that he's been caught up in a first lap crash.
Correct. Although it wasn't the first lap crash that ultimately took out Bell this week. A little past halfway, Austin Cindric put the bumper to Bell, and Bell went around and clobbered the outside wall in turns 3 and 4. Speaking of Cindric, another playoff driver, he is 61 points behind the cutoff. So both Bell and Cindric are in must-win situations. Allgaier and Tift, they'll need a little bit of help. They might be able to get enough stage points to move themselves in. Tyler Reddick, Elliott Sadler, and Daniel Hemrick, the 3 of them seem to be good as of right now.
So it's going to come down again to probably another wild race at Phoenix to see who gets to go to be the final 4 representatives in the Xfinity Series at championship weekend. So yeah, it's I tell you, Phoenix is shaping up to be a pretty wild weekend in all 3 divisions.
Absolutely, yeah. And just, gosh, I feel so bad for Christopher Bell because I really feel like this guy is one of the future stars of the sport. I mean, he's very talented. He's very good. He's very poised when you speak with him. I think he's got the makings of a future star. I just hate it for him. He's had this run of bad luck lately. So hoping he has a great run in Phoenix.
Yeah, well, and it appeared as the playoffs started in the Xfinity Series that Allgaier and Christopher Bell were going to be shoe-ins in the Xfinity Series, but that just proves, you still got to advance through the stages, and anything can happen, and it can be things not of your own making. So yeah, it's going to come down to this weekend where a couple of teams are going to have to pull out all the stops and see if they can't pull out a victory to transfer to Miami with a shot to win the championship.
Absolutely, yeah. So before we start talking about Phoenix, because we've still got plenty of time here. I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit about we talked about the reconfigure and the repave at Texas. They kind of did the same thing at Kentucky, and I just feel like you said, a lot of they made it tough to pass. They've even the IndyCar guys said they're not totally thrilled with the repave at Texas. So and it should be noted that it was one of the lightest Texas crowds I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts with the new packages? Is this really going to breathe new life into these mile-and-a-half ovals?
I think so. I really do. Based on what I saw at Charlotte All-Star Weekend, I think it's got a lot of potential. And I tell you, slowing these cars down, taking some horsepower away is not a bad thing. You people sitting in the stands are not going to know the difference if these cars are going into the corners 10 miles an hour slower. They're not going to notice a thing. I think too, and I want to inject this point as well. The reconfiguration, along with tire choice, was at issue at Texas this weekend. I think too that with this new package we're going to, if Goodyear can come up with a tire, they all got to work in concert. The whole package has got to be something that works. If they can come up with a tire that will degrade a little bit, I think we got the potential to see a different type of racing next year, possibly a more competitive type of racing where we don't see one car be able to get out and drive out to a 2 or 3 second lead and maintain it out in clean air. I think that's been detrimental to the sport over the last several years. But again, based on what I saw in the All-Star race at Charlotte back in May, that was a good package. It produced some terrific racing, and hopefully we'll be able to see it carry on next year, and they'll be able to take it and be able to put on some good shows with it.
Absolutely. So now Phoenix. So we talk about Phoenix has been somewhat reconfigured. I mean, the track layout is pretty much the same, but we've moved the start finish line. We've moved the pits.
The pits are the same.
The pit exit is different.
Yeah.
Right. But the position of the start finish line now makes the pits on the and they moved the primary grandstands around to where the start finish line is now. And it's going to be interesting, but just looking at the pictures of the construction, some of the fan amenities they put in there, with the midway and the fan zone and those new grandstand seats, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's a project they look like they spared no expense on. It looks like it's. I really wish I could go. If Phoenix wasn't all the way across the country, I would head out. But it's going to be for the fan experience. It looks like it's going to be something else, something special. So, but speaking of the race experience, so what do you guys feel like type racing we'll see in Phoenix?
Typical same race we've been seeing. I don't think that's going to change.
I personally think it'll be slightly different. The reason why the drivers never wanted to go double file or 3 wide, for that matter, into what was turns 1 and 2. That's now turns 3 and 4. So I think the racing will change slightly, just because drivers are going to have to go into that turn double file, if not 3 wide, to try to make moves right before the start finish line, especially towards the end of the stage or at the end of the race.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do make a valid point about the start of the race and the restarts where they'll have to go. Typically, they would run through that double file, but they'd already be at speed. Now they're going to be coming up to speed as they go through there and restarting as they go through. So that could create some issues, but I think basically we'll see the cream rise to the top like we always do at Phoenix, and like we've talked about earlier in the show. I think the 4 car will go pretty well rated. I mean, if you go by Vegas odds, he's a 2-1 favorite to win the race, and even the announcement of the penalties has not changed that. So I still think you're going to see a good run from the 4 car. And if I had to pick somebody, that would be my pick.
Well, there you go. You do have to pick somebody, and there you go. So, Richard, now that your pick of Harvick has been snatched away, who do you like for Phoenix? What do you think? What do you think we're going to see out of the Phoenix race?
Well, I mean, if you go by Martin Truex's statement, there's a higher power, controlling some of these races at the moment. So maybe we should pick him. I don't know. Phoenix. Let's throw Clint Boyer. Let's throw Clint Boyer out there. See what he does out there. Yeah, Clint Boyer.
Yeah, I think it really would be interesting to see one of these guys in the below the cut line win the race, just to see who would take, because it takes one of the big 3 out.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to see which one it is. So now Seth.
Now that's something else I've been talking about for the past couple of weeks.
That's why I went to you. That was my segue for you, sir.
And I personally think it's going to be Chase Elliott. I mean, he had a good run there last year. Somewhat similar to Dover and Martinsville. He had good runs. He ended up winning this year at Dover. So
he's pretty much in a must-win situation, too, isn't he?
Not anymore because of the penalty with Harvick.
Okay, right.
He was 57 points behind. Now he's 17 behind.
Okay. All right. That's a good pick. I mean, yeah, that's a really good pick out there too. And then too, there's other spoilers out there that you could say. Kyle Larson has typically run good out there in past races, but I swear that team has seemed to be snake bit the last 4 or 5 races. They seem like they haven't been able to do anything and run well. So I don't know. Maybe they can turn it around and have a decent run out there and play the part of the spoiler. But who knows? But I think it'll be a pretty spirited and wild race with so many guys out there vying for really the last 3 spots going into Miami.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of storylines to follow.
I mean, you think that's pretty unusual because normally you would have 2 spots already set going into this weekend. You'd have your, if things run true to form, you'd have your Martinsville winner, and then you'd have your Texas winner. They would be set going into to this race, and then of course now there's really 3 open spots now with Harvick's issues. So that's really going to leave some room for some interesting strategy and other things come Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is really safe other than Joey Logano, who's guaranteed a spot. I think any one of those big 3 could run into trouble and get knocked below the line. Again, particularly if we say one of the outliers wins. So and then of course if Chase Elliott wins and then goes on to win the Cup, people will cry that the fix is in because that's NASCAR's next big star. But and
I tell you, really, trouble befell 2 of the big 3 at Texas. You had the 78 have his issues there. He had a loose wheel and had to come and make a pit stop. And then when he came to make that pit stop, he was got a pit road penalty for having a crewman over the wall too soon. So it really put him behind the 8 ball. And then, of course, Kyle Busch had issues as well, and he finished a lap down too. So basically what saved those guys is their bonus points and playoff points that they'd accumulated throughout the season and throughout the early rounds of the playoffs. So, but yeah, they had some issues at Texas. So we'll see how they treat Phoenix going out there and what their strategy will be.
Absolutely. So I get to make a pick, and I'm gonna go with Kyle Busch, because he can seemingly win anywhere. And again, he's had a little bit of a lull, but lull for Kyle Busch never lasts too long. So before we start talking about some other racing, the news about Martin Truex and his new home next year that is now official. He'll be taking over the 19 along with his crew chief Cole Pearn. And the word on the street is that Daniel Suarez will move into the 41 car over at Stewart-Haas Racing, and then Kurt Busch is set to be announced taking over Jamie McMurray's ride, the number 1 car at Chip Ganassi Racing. So we have not only is Suarez leaving Gibbs, he's also coming out from under the Toyota banner, and Toyota had hoped to keep him, didn't they, Seth?
They did, and one of the comments that I specifically remember when Levine Family Racing announced their move to Toyota, Bob Levine had said that he would have run a second car and would still be open to running a second car if Toyota would give that team enough engines to do so. So there was still talk, as recently as about a month ago, of a second Toyota car over there that could have been easily for Daniel Suarez or Christopher Bell or another driver, but it never materialized, and that's what, from all the talk, Suarez is going to end up being in the 41, and Kurt Busch, who all the talk has him going to the number 1.
You know, and that seems like a major snafu for Toyota, in that they are losing a major sponsor that was part of the Toyota program. If Aris goes over to the 41 car, that's a major sponsor that leaves that Toyota fold.
Although they are keeping a major sponsor.
Contractually, they have to remain one more year, obviously. But still, when you look at it going forward, that does not make, to me, a lot of good business sense when, they could keep that big sponsor in the fold and probably find a home and help develop 2 up-and-coming drivers. So where are you going to do Christopher Bell now? Where, you're going to have to find him. You're going to have to find him a home sooner or later.
Well, the comment about Christopher Bell is that he needs one more season in the Xfinity Series.
Obviously, he does.
But he keeps saying that he wants to move up, and he is probably the oldest driver of this young crowd, of the young up-and-coming drivers. He's probably the oldest one of that group, and he wants to go up to Cup, and he wants to do it sooner rather than later. And
how old is he? Like 26, or is he older? No. Seth's
Wikipedia is your friend.
He is 24.
24, yeah. So
I just find it.
So he's still rather young. I mean,
but when you have drivers, look at Kyle Busch Motorsports, 18-year-olds in Todd Gilliland and Harrison Burton, not to mention Christian Eakes and Riley Herbst. I mean, you have a bunch of drivers that are 6, 7, 8 years younger than Christopher Bell moving up the ladder. Toyota, and I keep saying this, they do not have enough space for the sheer number of drivers in their program.
They don't. They're going to end up losing somebody.
Not just somebody. They're going to lose, I would guess, somewhere between 10 and 15 drivers. Yeah. Because between ARCA, trucks, Xfinity, and late models, they have about 25 to 30 development drivers. Yeah. And they only have 5 full-time Cup teams.
Right, and you don't have that many seats in Cup to take care of all those people anyway, whether they go to Chevrolet or Ford after. There's just not enough room.
And to quote Rick Hendrick, because he really doesn't have a driver development program, he has constantly said he lets Toyota and Ford develop the drivers, and he just hires them.
That's right, and that's what'll end up happening.
Snatches them up. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't really snatch them up because there's nowhere for them to go, and they'll end up somebody get out of a contract. Now you've got a talented individual do it. But that brings me to another point, and I want to end up with it too. And there's a couple of big articles that came out this week after the sparse crowd at Texas, and of course they come out every 2 or 3 races after we've seen a sparse crowd and talk about the ills of the sport and what's happening. And I've often thought this too. We've got a bunch of drivers coming into the sport with virtually no following. They come in, they appear on the circuit. You know what I'm saying? They here one day they're not there, and poof, the next day they're there. You haven't seen a lot of development on the short tracks. If it is, it's been very fast, and it comes along. So there's really, when these kids hit Xfinity, they really have no fan following behind these guys, and I'm kind of like there was in the old days when guys came up and they started and they developed a following at their local short track and they moved up the career ladder. Those days are virtually gone, and I think that to some degree affects a lot of the fan following that is attending these races. They don't have anything invested in it as far as a favorite driver, other than someone that's established, that's been in the Cup Series a while or something like that. But these new kids come up and they come in. There's virtually no fan following, and I think that hurts the Xfinity Series, and I think it hurts it in the fact that they're trying to make names for these kids, but they're not having anybody to tune in on TV or come and watch these things. And I think pulling the Cup drivers out of it and reducing the number of events they can participate in it is ultimately going to be a detriment to the Xfinity Series.
Well, I agree with you, at least on the Xfinity Series as of right now. There are a handful of drivers that are coming up that do have a following. You had Rico Abreu, who had a huge following from the World of Outlaws. You have Sheldon Creed, who has a following from off-road trucks, along with Riley Herbst. You have a handful of drivers in ARCA that could be moving up, like, say, Natalie Decker, Christian Eakes. There are a handful of drivers here and there that do have a following, and then you have ones, like you say, that just randomly show up almost. And I'll be honest, there's been times where I've been writing the event previews each week, and I'm actually caught off guard or surprised by some of the names I've seen.
It seems like you just come out of nowhere, and they're in a pretty decent ride. Yeah, I agree. There are a few, and I think another one that I failed to mention was the Priest kid. He's coming from New England, and he's got a good following in the modifieds, and he's a little bit different, and he's sort of a little bit different animal there. The way he's had to pool his resources and get rides along the way. I think he will bring a following when he comes to Cup, and I guess he's going into 47 next year. But some of these other kids, I think I think that's one of the drawbacks that has really hurt Xfinity, along with the removal of the Cup stars that were coming down and running that series some.
Well, I still like the removal of the Cup drivers. I will say there are a handful of drivers in the Xfinity Series that have worked very hard to make names for themselves. One that comes to mind, Ross Chastain. I mean, the following that he was able to get before he even reached Ganassi. And you also have his teammate Garrett Smithley, who's going along the same lines trying to make a name for himself and a following for himself, which it actually seems like is working for a handful of drivers here and there. Jeremy Clements is another one that comes to mind. And granted, a lot of these drivers are underfunded teams, underfunded drivers, lack of sponsorship. Alex Labbe, another one who has a following, granted, a little bit different because he is the NASCAR Pinty Series champion from Canada last year. So he has a built-in following from Canada. But there are a handful of drivers here and there that the names are made here approach is working, but it's not necessarily working for the names that NASCAR is trying to promote.
Yeah, and that to me is what they've got to figure something out to make to get the fans back involved in the Xfinity Series. That's one of the things that really concerns me, that series and how far it's kind of fallen down the popularity ladder. I mean, I'm really shocked at the crowds they get on Saturday when they run companion races. It's really startling that there's as few fans at these shows, and then of course the TV ratings are abysmal. But yeah, I wish. I mean, basically, you know, we talk about, we say this all the time. A rising tide floats all boats, and I think that something helping that Xfinity Series would carry over. The momentum from it would carry over and help Cup as well. I just think there's something needs to be looked at. I don't know if the current track they're going on is going to work or not. I just am at a loss for what to do about the Xfinity Series.
Well, just as you said, like the momentum helping from the Xfinity Series to the Cup Series, the one example today that I can see is next year's rules package, which started out in the Xfinity Series. Mm-hmm. So I can see it is working in some aspects, just not in all the aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. So I just want to circle back quickly to the driver movement we spoke of. So, I mean, is there any word on Jamie McMurray's plans for 2019?
Rumor has it that he is taking Chip Ganassi up on the offer of running the Daytona 500 in a third Chip Ganassi racing car. Otherwise, there is no news whether he's going to run any Xfinity, whether he's going to take a management role like Dario Franchitti did.
I did read something that he was offered a bit of a leadership role within the team. And I imagine we'll see him at the Rolex 24 again as well. But no takers for a full-time Cup ride for Jamie, huh?
None that I've heard.
Okay, well, there's a guy that's had a pretty good career. So now, Richard, you've been a little quiet there. So Formula One has announced a new venue for 2020.
Yes. Yes, sorry. Yes, they have indeed. Sorry. Vietnam. They're going to be racing out there. It's been talked about for a number of years. Similar to some of the other sort of Singapore-style circuits, a street circuit with a new permanent pit lane area and some extra permanent track that's being built out there. Yes, I think they're aiming for 2020. There's a couple of things I said that's been maybe a little bit optimistic, so it's more likely to be 2021. It's I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about this one. Really, it's obviously showing the way that Liberty are going with the brand of Formula One, for want of a better word. Now you have. They're going to Miami next year or year after. I think that's 2020 as well, and Vietnam now.
That's if that happens. I mean,
I
have very little confidence in anybody trying to put a new street race on in the United States based on the failures of the Grand Prix of New Jersey that didn't happen for Formula One, the Grand Prix of Boston that didn't happen for IndyCar, the Grand Prix of Nashville that didn't happen for IndyCar. It just seems like there's so much local opposition and political red tape to jump through that it's a nightmare for anybody to get these things off the ground. And the only street races in the states that are successful are the ones that have been around for a long time. You know, your
for sure.
You know, Long Beach, Toronto, the one down in Florida, St. Pete. But none of the new ones have really lasted. The ones that have gotten off the ground. So
Houston showed promise until the crash there,
but Baltimore showed promise too, but again, the local opposition. So, but
I think the difference you've seen there is that, the potential, the difference you're going to see this time around is in the past you had, Bernie in his group, and Bernie could fall out with himself in an elevator. So to have Liberty in there, it'd be interesting to see how much political sway they have in the US compared to the Bernie situation. I mean, potentially, who knows? Anyway, going back to Vietnam.
Back to Vietnam. Now, here's my thought on Vietnam, Richard. A lot of the so-called newer races have been in these oil-rich countries, Bahrain, and you've got these, and Formula One charges these astronomical sanction fees. Right now, I know Vietnam has a large population for sure, but it's not really known as a very rich country. I realize that it's an untapped market, but it doesn't seem to fit the profile of where Formula One has gone. I mean, so is this Liberty looking to do something different? Are they offering them a reduced sanction fee, or who's putting up the money for this?
A lot of the times you see in countries like Azerbaijan, it's government that put up this money for these events to promote tourism and promote, the sort of image of the city or image of the country, which hasn't always been the best historically. So it's interesting to see them do that. As you say, they were very vocal about, we've got to keep the traditional races, which is great. But if Miami and if Miami and Vietnam come in for 2020, who drops out? You're going to lose one of the more established races. And you look at the track, and it looks an interesting circuit, but there's sections on it that they, in their press release, they even said were modelled on other tracks around the world. So turn 1 and 2 is like Nürburgring. There's a section there that's similar to Saint-Devote in Monaco, and then you've got the S's from Japan. It's almost like a PlayStation game, and designatrack.com or something. It's of somebody who's been using like paint off Windows and the copy and paste function. It's like, come on, guys.
Is this track going to be in Saigon?
Nah, I did read it. No, it's a suburb of
Hanoi.
Hanoi, that's it. Yeah.
Oh, so it's in the northern part. What used to be the old North Vietnam.
I believe so. Yeah. But it's you sometimes wonder. Formula One, to a certain extent, has enough issues at home, as it were, with its established tracks. You sometimes think, hey, look, guys, get those ducks in a row first, then go and sort out, these new places you want to go to. Don't run before you can walk, sort of thing. But I doubt, no doubt, it'll be a well-run event. But you can see, the circuits that we've lost recently that were new, India, South Korea, they were pretty well-run events.
Yeah.
But you can't keep swapping and changing and bringing in. You can't keep bringing in these tracks every 5 minutes and expecting people to embrace the sport.
Richard, if this race in Vietnam goes off, will it be an expansion to the schedule, or will it?
Well, this is the question.
Will something be coming off?
I know this season has been a limit for the teams, and they've been saying, we could maybe do one more race. We certainly can't do more. So, as I say, you throw that potential Miami race in there, and you throw in the Vietnam race, you're going to lose at least one or two of the existing races. Now, I know Germany, that race is constantly on the brink, teetering on the brink of running out of money. So then, which other one do you lose? I don't know where the contracts stand for a lot of these races and when the contracts expire. But it'll be interesting to see what the schedule looks like going forward.
Yes, definitely. So, speaking of the schedule, this coming weekend, are we graced with a Formula One race, or do we have another week off?
In Brazil, which, nobody really is interested now because Lewis has already won the championship.
It's all sewed up. Yeah, but
it's a great venue. It's a fantastic atmosphere. You know, it's a shame there's not a Brazilian driver slightly, to draw the crowds and get people interested in it. But it's an amazing.
That's really mind blowing when you consider how many talented drivers have come out of Brazil that there's not a current Brazilian in Formula One.
Oh,
that just it boggles the mind. It really does.
Yep.
But I digress.
Yes, no, I agree. But I totally, totally agree with you there. You know, you need somebody out there, and unfortunately, in a way, Brazil's losing a little bit of its charm, for want of a better word, in that, the teams used to go there and the power would go out, and you'd be running off like almost candlelight during the race, and sometimes you wouldn't get commentary from the race because the lose connection and all this sort of stuff, and it's sort of become a little bit too anemic now in that everything works perfectly. It's a shame.
It's a shame that it works perfectly. Okay.
Yeah, you like that bit of.
All right, so we've got just a few minutes left in the show, so let's. What kind of race do you think we're going to see in Brazil? Is this going to be another track that really favors the Mercedes, or can we see?
I think the Ferraris will be strong.
I think the Ferraris will be strong.
Depends what the tyre compounds they choose. If it's the soft tyre compound again, and the Mercedes run without this. I mean, again, we've talked about this before. I am putting a lot of money on the recent issues where you've seen Mercedes not be as strong in Austin, and Mexico is down to this wheel rim issue, and them not running this special wheel rim that they developed, despite what Toto Wolff's been saying. So then you look at you look at that going forward into Brazil this weekend. If it's hot out there, I could see Ferrari and Red Bull being strong. I believe the race is also at altitude again slightly, so it's similar to the conditions we saw in Mexico. But I would be, I'd be surprised if Mercedes are up there. Lewis is probably nursing a little bit of a hangover from the last 2 weeks. So I'd expect to see the Ferraris and Red Bulls up there.
All right, so you're going to pick...
I'm going to pick Vettel. Let's pick Vettel up there, yeah.
All right, and Gray, who do you like for Brazil?
Well, I tell you, I'm going to say let's see what Raikkonen can do. See if he's feeling his oats now that he's got back and been on the first step at on the podium. Let's see what happens if he can get him another one.
That's a good pick, yeah. A lot of folks would love to see Kimi win another one. Now, Seth, what are your thoughts on Brazil in the Formula One race?
Let's go with Bottas. Since Hamilton's finally won the championship, maybe he can actually win this season.
Yeah, they could pay him back for the team orders thing, yeah.
As long as they don't do it through team orders, because
I was going to say we've seen that with the payback win with Michael Schumacher handing Barrichello one. Yeah. I would say Nigel Mansell gave one to Riccardo Patrese just as the thanks for being a good teammate and letting me win every week. So yeah, Bottas may indeed win, but I'm going to go with Riccardo, even though Riccardo was so mad last week or the week before that he said, you know what, somebody else can just have my Red Bull seat for the rest of the year. I think maybe he's going to channel that aggression into a win, just to tell Max to, hey, don't forget who was here first. So, but anyway, we are about out of time. So I want to thank you, Gray and Seth and Richard. Appreciate talking to you guys. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network. I want to thank iHeartRadio. And I'd like to thank all you folks that tune in and listen to us. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time. Good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com. Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.